Anna Zilahi, you are an Hungarian poet, but you're much more than that, since your poetry and your work are very much connected to the world we live in. In 2017, you published a book of poems titled The Whale is Not a Motive. You are a founding member of Extro Realm, a group of visual artists in Hungary who critique the anthropocentric thinking, dealing with the Anthropocene, the issues of climate change, and what you call, we talk about it later, I think, new realism. You are one of the authors of Extrodaesia, an encyclopedia towards a post-anthropocentric world, published in English and in Hungarian by Typotex in Budapest last year. Earlier this year, you participated in the Slow Life exhibition at the Ludwig Museum in Budapest with a poetic meditation, which I liked a lot, I must say, evocating the inner corporal sound. Just one more thing to add, that like me, you studied economics before moving towards art. Eszter, you are also Hungarian. You have studied in the UK, where you obtained your BA at the University of Bristol, your MA at the very prestigious Curator Institute, and you just started studying for a PhD in art history at the University of Edinburgh. You share with Anna a common interest in theories of post-anthropocentrism and perspectives of clinical justice. You recently contributed an article, which is only in Hungarian, to the Climate Imaginary Reader, which is created by Anna, which focused on the critique of petrocapitalism in recent works of art. But I didn't read it because my Hungarian is nil. As one of the curators selected for the third cycle of Parallel, you conceived a virtual exhibition titled To See Our Common Place in collaboration with UGM Maribor and the EK08 Maribor Triennale of Environment and the Art. Your main focus of interest lies at the intersection of art and ecology, with a particular concern for the representation of non-human animals, which we'll talk a little bit later in connection with one of the artists in the show. So what I suggest is maybe that Anna, you could give us some introduction about your thinking and your work and your poem, and then we can react to that. How is that?
Okay, let's do so. Thank you for the nice introduction. Thanks for inviting me to this talk. So I'm a Hungarian artist and poet, and my work focused on the challenges of the ecological and climate crisis for some years now. I founded an artist group in Hungary in 2017 with the aim to try to thematize the climate crisis in the literary and the art scene, because somehow me and the people around me, we had the impression that it is under-thematized and it's not really talked about, this very worrying topic. And for this reason, we started to build up a small community, and we figured out that one of the main reasons why there's no attention on this topic is that we don't really have language. We don't really have the required notions to describe what's going on around us. I mean, even if you have those notions, it's hard to fathom and grasp the large-scale changing of our environment, as also Eszter and her exhibition points out. But especially if you don't really have the right notions or a starting point from which you can approach the different aspects of this huge global challenge, then it's hard. So we basically started out with reading sessions on different new materialist and realist thoughts. And we also read authors who were not much translated to Hungarian before. And we also like try to discuss different topics related to the Anthropocene and the critique of the Anthropocene. And after a while, we figured out that after the reading sessions and exhibitions we organized, it would be nice to collect all the notions together and to somehow present it in Hungarian for the first time. So this is how we published Extradasia in 2019, which is a bilingual Hungarian English dictionary. And I think one of the other focus of our group is to experiment with what we regard as knowledge and what we don't, what we regard as science and scientific and what we don't. And we wanted not only to collect list of notions, an arbitrarily put together list of notions, but also invited poets and artists to bring together different kind of knowledges, not just the analytic kind of knowledge that we all know from science. So this was our main focus, and since then we built up a network of thinkers and produced more texts and discussions and field trips. So basically, where we at now, preparing for our next exhibition in the framework of Biennial Budapest, which will be rescheduled in 2021.
Would you think that there's a specific Hungarian or at least Central European perspective to that?
I think that it's really hard to label different approaches with such regional labels, but I personally think that collecting together local experiences, local problems, locally understandable processes of what's going on is, I think it can be a main goal. And I think it's a very important question, and I don't find it super constructive to label approaches regionally. But in terms of how we are channeled into the economic system, for example, I think Hungary can be regarded as a kind of semi-peripheric position. I think there are some notions which can be fruitful, but we have to be cautious with labeling, I think.
Okay. One thing that is quite interesting is, for me at least, is the manner in which poetry and activism, or at least thinking about those issues, can mix together. You will talk about that?
Yeah, so I'm a poet and I do write poetry, and I think the images, the problems, the questions that interest me in my artistic work, when, for example, we go out on an Anthropocene field trip to a refinery or to a biofarm, I think these images and problems are also present in my poetry, but also the poetic thinking is somehow channeled into the actions we do with my artist group. And also I think the other artists in the Extra Realm artist group, Rita Süveges and Gideon Horváth, they also have a certain poetic vision. So I think these really fruitfully work together, and we just try to maintain this poetic quality in our work.
Okay. Eszter, you want to react to that? Maybe explain your link with Anna and how you incorporated that into your thinking for the your thinking in general, and specifically your thinking for the exhibition?
Yeah, thank you. When I started thinking about the exhibition and how the exhibition would look like, and how the context and the concept of the exhibition would look like, at that time I was already familiar with Anna's work as part of the Extra Realm group. And actually one of the texts which was very influential in developing the concept of my exhibition, it's an article by Malm and Hornborg. It was discussed during one of the reading groups that they organized last year. And it's a text which talks about it essentially criticizes the Anthropocene notion as sort of inadequate to address the climate crisis from a sociological perspective, because it regards humanity as, it takes humanity as one big entity, and blames the current ecological crisis on humanity as one big entity, whereas it's only a fraction of the human race which can be held accountable for the current crisis. So many of the texts which were later incorporated into my thinking and into the exhibition as well, in some way or another, I encountered them during the readings, during the reading groups organized by Extra Realm. But I think more conceptually speaking, my exhibition focuses on how the social, political systems and structures which underpin the environmental crisis can be dissected from a personal, through personal and banal experiences. And I think there is a connection between how one of the ethos of the Extra Realm group is to address the ecological crisis through a local eye and from a local perspective, and how the exhibition To See a Common Place is also trying to address global issues which are sometimes just so ungraspable from a point of view which is more personal and which can be more digestible essentially for the individual.
Okay. Do you want to explore or not? I mean, it's really your choice. The issue of Capitalocene versus Anthropocene. You want to explore that, both of you, or is it not interesting for you?
I mean, for me, it's a very interesting term, and I think I do prefer it to the Anthropocene, definitely. So this is a term which is one of the alternatives offered to the Anthropocene notion, and it regards capitalism as the catalyst behind the climate chaos, and regards capitalism as the main agent which provokes the procedures which have led to this point. So the thirst for profit, the exploitation of labor, the exploitation of the labor of socially and politically underprivileged people, and the need of the elite of the global north to dominate the environment and to exploit the resources of the earth. So for me, it's an incredibly useful term. I don't know how you feel about it, Anna, but I like the term very much.
Anna?
I would say I also prefer Capitalocene to the Anthropocene, But when we talk about these terms, which are both super abstract, I think we have to point at the fact that Anthropocene started out as a geological notion, and it came to cultural theory later on. And there's this weird tangent between these notions, the critique of the Anthropocene, which is Capitalocene, and the Anthropocene, because it actually points out how important it would be if interdisciplinary communication was so much stronger among the sciences. So if natural sciences and social sciences weren't as detached as they are at the moment. And I think the aim of the notion of the Anthropocene from the geological point of view is quite clearly pointing to the direction of what Capitalocene is all. So both of these notions are important to me, and I actually prefer Capitalocene as well, but I see the importance of the notion of the Anthropocene within the natural sciences sphere. And I think the tension between the two notions actually points to the fact how important it would be if natural sciences and the social sciences were less detached as they are at the moment, and there were genuine communication between disciplines.
Okay. You want to talk more about that, or you want to start talking about the artist in the exhibition, Eszter?
I mean, I would love to talk about the project, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please.
Would you like to ask questions, or how should I go about it?
No, let's go artist by artist and explain a little bit. Not so much what they do, because you have seen that, but how does that fit into the global thinking? And there are at least two of them on which I will have some questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, so in the exhibition and during the process of curating the exhibition, I was very lucky. I worked with 5 incredible artists from Brazil, the US, Lithuania, Finland, and Hungary. And what is common in the project and what sort of frames the entire exhibition is really the personal, banal experience and how that can be connected to global systems and power structures which impact the climate crisis. And I think all the projects touch on sometimes different, sometimes similar aspects of these systems. So, for example, Gustavo Barbella, he's a Brazilian artist, and his project focuses on the ways and procedures of colonization and self-colonization and how that manifests in suburban Brazil. His project consists of 2 different series, 2 different parts. One of them is a series that depicts the Statue of Liberty, or some would think that it is the Statue of Liberty, but it's actually a replica of the Statue of Liberty. And it is a statue which has been reproduced many times in Brazil as part of the decoration of a department store, which imitates the form of the White House. And this is, and the series itself is kind of an exploration of how an idealized sense of Americanness filters into the contemporary Brazilian landscape, and how it takes on, in some ways, a form of self-colonization, of kind of giving up a local sense of local identity in order to comply with an other ideal of an idealized identity, which is very different from one's own. And the other part of the project is another series, which is called the BAMTV series, and that also deals with issues of colonization, but in broader terms, it deals with how what is actually a native bird species kind of interrupts the image and the composition of the image that depicts a banana tree. And the banana tree is not a native species of Brazil, but nevertheless, it's not the element of the image which is considered a disruption. It's actually the native bird which flies into the picture frame. And what accompanies these two series is a short video clip, which is a slideshow of Gustavo's poems, which deal with the feelings that are provoked in Gustavo as a result of this landscape, of this modified, colonized, self-colonized landscape, and how that impacts his feelings and what kind of emotions and anxieties that provoke these procedures invoke in him. Yeah. So, would you like to ask questions about it, or?
One question about Gustavo Balbella. I mean, I know Brazil a little bit, not very well, but a little bit. And for me, one of the foundations of the Brazilian soul, the Brazilian psyche, if you want, is the cannibal, the Anthropophagus, Manifesto Anthropophago in 1928 by Andrade, who saying that the quality or the essence of Brazil is to be able to eat whatever comes in and to transform it. And not all, but most of the Brazilian culture, whether in literature or whether in visual arts, has been based around that, has been based on the fact that the foreign influence, European before, North American since 50 years ago, have all been transformed and digested by the Brazilians. And almost every artist in Brazil will relate to that and will position himself for or against that, explaining how he functions with that. And I was a bit surprised by the position of Gustavo Balbella with respect to what he calls American influence and the Statue of Liberty, which is simple, which is clearly a symbol, but without the historical dimension, if you want, from what I understand, of this Brazilian tendency to incorporate, digest, and transform the American influence.
So I think I'll continue with Johanna's work, Johanna Cardiologne. She's a Finnish artist, and her work explores interspecies connections and human, non-human, animal relationships. And her work consists of two parts. The first one is actually an archival material from her family archives. It's a short video clip which was shot by her father in the 80s in zoos in Finland. And it portrays animals in captivity and how they live in those environments, as well as there's a short part where her little brother appears and he doesn't seem to be all that thrilled by the activity of going to the zoo. And the other part of the project is a series of images which were shot by a trail camera in northern Brazil that Johanna placed in the forest. And what is particular about this trail camera is that it takes a picture whenever there's movement in front of it. So the the process of taking the picture is actually it's not in the hands of the artist anymore, but is influenced by the movement of the non-human animal in front of it. And these two parts of the projects are juxtaposed so that there can be a there can be a certain contrast established between them. And what is particular about them is that Johanna was really trying to emphasize the importance of the animal gaze and kind of giving them giving an agency, a certain agency back to the animal that we took away from them by putting them into captivity, into zoos. And sort of, and she was also trying to explore how the animal as a, not only as an agent, but also, well, how in reality the animal gaze is something which can be overlooked, and which is something which is not present in the zoo. And she, in her introduction to the project, she quotes John Berger's essay on zoos and on the animal gaze. And what Berger says is that it's very rare that we can actually see the gaze of an animal in the zoo, because it's something which has been taken away from them. And so this project is really a reclamation of the animal gaze and gives back a certain agency to the animal in front of the camera. And in a way, it explores non-anthropocentric perspectives and points of view regarding animals.
And that's a subject at which you are very interested, yes? The relationship between humans and non-human living animals. It's something on which you have been working quite a bit. Eh? Thanks to you, I read John Berger again. I read Looking at Animals again, saying, why look at animals? And and I reread it as a preparation for that. And there are quite a few things interesting on Granville and the caricatures and so on. You want to talk a bit more, not only in respect with Johanna Cardiologne, but a bit more generally, and Anna as well, probably, about this interest of you on the relationship between the species? You want to elaborate on that?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So in the past months, I've been doing quite a lot of reading on interspecies care and the ethic of care when it comes to animals, and how we can emphasize the relationality between humans and non-humans, so that it's sort of it's more of so that we become more connected to them and we appreciate their points of view in this sort of interconnected relationship. And yes, I actually would like to come back to Johanna's work from this perspective and what caring for animals actually means, because I think the zoo, for example, can be very often seen as sort of a process of a place where processes of care can be implemented, because obviously there are caretakers of those animals, and those animals are very safe in a way. But also this is something which actually takes them away from their freedom. And also the zoo itself is something which, and John Berger writes about this as well in his essay, that it's very ironic that people go to the zoo to get closer to animals, but in reality it actually emphasizes the distance between humans and non-humans, because it's very much human constructed, it's very artificial, and it's not something which is going to bring us closer to other than human beings. It's something which is going to emphasize this distance. And I think it's quite interesting and almost ironic layer to Johanna's work, that by actually giving up a control over the camera, and actually giving back the agency of image making to the animal in some ways, this distance is somehow shortened, even though physically we are further away from the animals, but in reality we see them in a context which is more, which gives them back their agency and their gaze and their identity.
Anna, does that fit somewhat with your thinking, or is it something that which interacts with your own thinking?
Yeah, definitely. So when we think about the ecological crisis and climate crisis, we tend to think about nature as just an environment which is gone wrong, and there's something wrong with it, and we have to fix it. This is the kind of modernist narrative, and I think it's really important to realize that this kind of objectifying of non-human beings is part of the problem, why we are experiencing all these crises. So when we don't regard ourselves as part of an ecosystem, and we regard ourselves humans on top of a hierarchy, and below us we imagine all the other beings, I think that's a problem. And also when we try to preserve the natural environment that we are destroying, I think one aspect really has to be a deeper understanding of the needs of the natural beings around us. So what Eszter talks about, from my point of view, I think it's really important to emphasize that actually animals have a perspective. They actually have experiences. They have their own perception of the world through their bodily needs, also their emotions, and all these things that we try to think about as only human. And I think it's very constructive to think about all the other beings as part of a bigger system, and to try communicating with this system and its needs.
I totally agree, but at the same time, as you were all well aware, this is a very Western view of the animal world. There are societies that have a very different view. If you look at the Amerindians, if you look at the Aborigines in Australia, if you look at animism, at totemism, you have a relationship with the animal world, which is not this frontier, this border, this difference about having a soul, having a spirit, but which is much more integrating them. I don't know, Anna or Eszter, if you know of an anthropologist called Philippe Descola. Philippe Descola is a sort of successor of Claude Lévi-Strauss at the professorship at the Collège de France. And Descola, I just checked, he wrote the book in English called Beyond Nature and Culture, 2013, University of Chicago Press, which is exactly about that. Which is exactly how the different culture separate how they look at the separation between human and animals in different cultures. And that's extremely interesting. I saw, he made an exhibition, when was it? 10 years ago, at the Quai Branly in Paris. You don't see much of it. Yeah. And this was from the visual art viewpoint, exactly about that, about separating what he called the naturalism, which is basically our own conception. Our bodies are quite similar to the bodies of animals, but we have a spirit and they don't. What he called animism, where in fact the tiger and the human are the same. They have a different look, a different appearance, but in fact they are the same. What he called totemism, where both the physical and the moral characteristics are unique within a totem, within a clan, within a tribe, within a group, and what he called analogism, which is more the Chinese version of that, where everybody is different, morally and physically, but you have analogies between them. And that's very interesting. I mean, if you have the chance to read that, I think the scholar did some thinking on that, which I have not seen anywhere else.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think it's, yes, one way to dismantle species hierarchies, and one way to go about it would be definitely to look for indigenous perspectives. But more generally speaking, I think it's very interesting how we approach animals and how we approach animals' rights to life, for example, and whether we are basing it on the fact that we are trying to look for similarities and we're trying to give them rights, essentially because with the reasoning that they are similar to us, which I think is a very anthropocentric thinking, or we actually acknowledge that we will never be, that there is diversity in ways of communication, that we can value other ways of communication and other ways of communication, other ways of thinking, and we actually acknowledge that we will never fully comprehend non-human animals, but that it is not a reason to dominate them and to endanger their physical security. So I think, yes, what you just brought in is very important, to actually look for what other cultures, other non-Western cultures have to teach us about this issue, and kind of question our own thinking in regards to animals' rights to life, whether the concept of rights is something which is inherently anthropocentric. This is a question. Yes, it's just something very, it's quite a heterogenic field.
Okay. You want to move to the next artist?
Yes, I can. Yes, I will move to Indre. So Indre Urbanite, she is a Lithuanian artist who lives in the Netherlands, and her project, Don't Speak Loudly, It's Harmful for Butterflies. It consists of videos that she actually filmed from her computer by using a phone, and the videos are actually from sites of stock imagery, stock videos of very stereotypically touristy places, touristy places, but like natural landscapes. So mountains and sandy beaches and waterfalls and other similar, just very stereotypical touristy places. And there's a narration accompanying the videos, which is the story of a trail, the story of a journey, where we are trying to look for the beauty in the natural world around us, but we are ultimately disappointed by it because we are placing our expectations upon what we're actually experiencing, and therefore we get very much disappointed. And this is a project which I think it's very hard to talk about, because I think it's very ironic and very funny and very sad and raging in many ways. And I think it's very hard to talk about the audio narration. Actually, this is something which I think has to be listened to. But more generally speaking, I think it's just a wonderful critique of, in broader terms, it's a wonderful critique of our social conditioning when it comes to tourism and the tourist industry. And it's actually quite interesting to talk about this project now, because it heavily criticizes our attitude to tourism and how it's almost a requirement that we travel and that we experience new places, and that we take pictures of these wonderful places which look a certain way and which are very useful in deceiving other people about how that particular place looked in the picture compared to how it looked in reality. Yes, I think it's a very funny project, but it's also incredibly depressing. And yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, that's it about Indre's work, I think. Shall I proceed
Okay.
to? Yeah. So the fourth project is by Shelley Weiler. She lives in New York, and the four images which are included in the exhibition are part of a bigger series, and these pictures are exploring sort of how humans very often treat nature as a way to project performance and performative qualities, and how performance becomes a kind of domination and a kind of manifestation of human-made power structures. So in specific terms, one of the images which I think is absolutely key, even among the four images it takes on, for me at least, it takes on a heightened importance, is the image of a Japanese cedar tree, which she took the image of in Tokyo. And this one has a very specific story to it. So in Japan, the Japanese forestry agency destroyed 45% of the native broadleaf forests to replace these forests with commercial timber. And this is something which, in Shelley's words, this is a project which failed economically, culturally, and monetarily. And because obviously they destroyed so many of the tree species which were central to local culture, and which served as inspiration to generations of Japanese artists. But also the project proved to be not profitable, so it failed also from a financial perspective, and also what we see in the image is actually it's called the tree cast, because the tree is actually hidden from the human eye because it's sick and people wanted to hide its appearance. So this is something which tells a lot about how so many people, especially in Western cultures, try to dominate nature at all costs, but they fail because they just don't take into account what other species, what plants, what animals in some contexts actually have the need for. So so I think for me personally, this is probably the most important image of the four pictures which are in the exhibition. Yes, just because I think it's just very central to this idea of domination and human-made power structures, and how it can fail so incredibly in so many ways, so incredibly much.
No, it's also the project on which the faking of nature is the most obvious.
Yes. Yeah.
Anna, feel free to intervene on whichever artist you want to bring some.
Just in the last image in the series, which is it's a telephone pole which imitates the form of a tree, but it's just very obvious that it's not a tree, and it's just very artificial, and it dominates the landscape in which it is included. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing about this particular image is that Shelley actually grew up in the neighborhood, and this was something which she passed by every day, basically, in her childhood. And it's interesting how something which we regard as part of our everyday life is actually, when we reflect upon it, becomes something more and makes us reflect on the processes and on the systems of oppression and power structures in which we are embedded, and takes on a new meaning. So yes, I think in terms of the context of the exhibition, this is also quite an important image. And in Lisbon, it's going to be exhibited in a blown up, huge size. And my hope is that it's going to dominate that particular corner of the space. That's my hope.
Cassandra?
Yes, so that's the project of the Mankos Varga, who is a Hungarian artist, and his project is an exploration of how dystopian, mostly English dystopian literature, how it influenced his work, and how dystopias are actually some things which are, sometimes they are already in the past, sometimes they are in the future, but very often they are present. And how while many of the images in this series are look quite artificial, there are actually images which provoke very familiar emotions in us, emotions which are very much part of how we experience the kind of structures and systems in which we are embedded in. And so these images are reflections of how the dystopian social structures in which we live, how we live with them, how they are part of our everyday lives, and what kind of emotions they evoke in us. Yes, and the Mankos used quite a few literary references in his project. Most of these are books of English dystopian literature.
And clearly, I mean, Cassandra is someone very emblematic of all the denial of the ecological crisis. Cassandra was the prophet who always said things are going to happen and nobody believed her. And this is exactly what has been going on for the last 50 years, or maybe more, with respect to the world, no?
Yes.
I think it's a very good title.
Yes, he changed the title throughout the process, but I think, yes, I like the title as well. I think it's very reflective of the thinking procedures that we usually use when it comes to climate crisis, and when it comes to the very social systems that we participate in and we're part of. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to add some ideas. I just have to look at the artist again. So when we discussed Indre Urbanite, I hope I pronounce the name well. So I was just thinking about this kind of eco-critical idea, how we actually frame nature as a landscape. One of our papers in the Mesosphere magazine, written by Rita Süveges, exactly examines how actually instead of like being immersed into a natural landscape, we prefer to culturally construct a landscape out of nature, and just seeing what we want to see and leaving out so many details of the natural environment as is required to maintain this culturally constructed image of nature. And I also see in these videos that this is exactly what these Instagram and just this kind of mediated nature and tourist podcast does to our thinking, that we actually think about nature as if it was like a white sandy beach with palm trees, or it's a forestry, very wild, it's jungle. So there is these topoi which are really like culturally constructed, and these really determine and limit our freedom and capacity to think about nature and our relationship with nature. So I recommend Rita's text because I think that's a fruitful pairing with these works and her paper. And when I was looking at this phone pole tree, I was just thinking how interesting it is that when we look at nature, we see through a cultural lens of constructing nature, but actually this object, this man-made object, can be perceived as a kind of, or is like aimed to look like a natural like nature imitating piece, which is like really, there's this like very ironic tension for me in this work. So I really enjoyed like contemplating on it, and I can also think of all these details in my environment, which actually I became used to them, and they are somehow part of the environment, but they are just so arbitrary, and so like they make this culture nature divide in our cultures so visible.
How do you want to conclude?
Me. Yes, I just want to say thank you so much for moderating the talk, and thank you so much, Anna, for accepting my invitation. Yes, I also would like to highlight that the exhibition was curated with help from Anna Kaiser-Rastenberger and Mamadou Mamazilala, who were my tutors and who really helped me framing the concept of the exhibition, and they just helped me immensely. So I just want to highlight that.
Important. Okay. Rebecca, you want to conclude?
Yes, of course. So I want to thank you, Eszter and Anna, for sharing your work with us, and Marc for always poking our guests and trying to take the most out of them. And just to remember that the exhibition of Eszter will be in Lisbon from November 25. So if you are around, just come by, pass by. And if you're not, you can see it online. And yeah, that's it.
Eszter, will you come or not?
I will go to Lisbon, yes.
Lisbon. Ah, great. Okay, so I won't see only your face. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. It was lovely. It was very interesting. Thank you very much for all these ideas and talk and stimulations. And let's continue. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.